Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan, and I am the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I will read Chapter 4, beginning on page 206 of my memoir, and the title is Grieving is Not Forgetting. So much loss. I mourned deeply, shaken to my core. Part of me had died, but also part of me had come alive. Life is about movement, either towards healing or away from it. The loss helped me breathe into the gift of goodbye. I found strength within myself. I found resilience, grace, and love. Surprisingly, without the energy to put on one of my many shadow masks, I found authenticity. What I braved. Death is inevitable, yet the Dolans never spoke of it unless it was as a veiled threat, as in, I'm going to kill you. What may have been more repulsive for my family at times was life. I knew the polarity of it. Both poles must exist and in balance, like light and shadow, yin and yang, dreaming and waking, winter and summer. What ultimately confused me was the idea of killing grief. How is that even possible? Often as I reached for the phone to call my younger sister, I'd begin to cry as I remembered, again, she is not physically there. How is it that I swing from the absence of family members as a constant, and then suddenly it stuns me that they are gone? It's like living on a field of geysers. Grief shows up like that for me. It astounds me when friends, after a cherished family pet has died, bring a bouncing puppy into their lives a week later. Grieving and mourning remind us of death. Nowhere did I feel there was room for the grieving and mourning I felt, although there was never a directive to not grieve. The story I made up was, I'm weird if I do, it's unhealthy and unnatural. What I braved in my experience of accepting that my family would not join me in a grieving process was to learn healthy ways to grieve. It was work that I began on my own, and up until now, I haven't been joined by any family member in the unfolding grief connected to my immediate family members taking their last breath. The steps I take seem very elementary, but they resonate with my heart. I'll always light a candle in their honor as a tribute to the brightness that once shone in them. I'll do all I can to direct my energy as I prepare to create a new relationship with them now that they are physically gone. After my mom died, I used the earth to ground my grief and provide a channel for my pain to move through me and be transformed. I took a red rose from her casket and laid it on the field all her children had played on as they grew up. It was next to our family home. As children, Mom would sit at the window and watch her babies play in the park. It was my healing memorial to Mom. Dad's few possessions ended up as mine. After his passing, I left his things in my hometown and asked for a friend to look after them for me. 5 years later, at Christmas time, I unpacked his boxes and could smell the scent of my dad in his robe. I always make sure when I decide to let go of family members' things that it feels right in my heart. Giving myself permission to feel my feelings is high on my list of how to grieve. Feelings are sensations in the body, not thoughts in the head to be judged. There is no squashing down on my body's sensations. I choose not to ignore them. I surround my pain with love and light. My feelings heal faster by being loved than by being ignored. If I feel them, I can heal them. On an intellectual level, I get grief. On a spiritual level, it's a bit more challenging to understand. In support of my grieving, I've never uttered why. It's not a question that is helpful. I've witnessed other family members fall into this trap. I choose to move my awareness to my heart. It grounds me and it allows me to rest. I've never put a time limit on how long I need to grieve. There are still moments while in Calgary where I'll turn a familiar corner and burst into tears with the memory of one of my family. Grieving is my process. What I braved is being able to get support for my grief. It is natural and it's healthy to do so. The unlearning. Grief has a way of laying bare the real you. When every attempt at being who you are is either overtly scuttled, hushed, or threatened out of you, you tend to fall in line. I loved watching kids my age encouraged to do what they wanted to do and be who they knew they were. It was perhaps the greatest envy I had of a few of my friends growing up. Listening to a friend burst into song while her parents were in the same room was completely unsettling. She was praised, encouraged, and hugged for being who she was and sharing her talent. I wouldn't dare sing at home for fear of being mocked, shamed, embarrassed, or labeled a fag. Authenticity was not a value I even knew existed until I began my long road of therapy and internal work. I had no role models in my family to mirror, standing tall for who they wanted to be. I have this scene etched in my memory from my grandfather's funeral in 1969, where my aunts sobbed in grief because of the death of their father. My dad, being the eldest son, while supporting his mom graveside, turned and glared at his sisters with a look intended to stop their wails. In that moment, I made up a story that thou shalt not let the world see my grief, nor my authentic pain. Knowing I was gay since I was 3 years old gave me zero superpowers when it came to expressing my authentic self. If anything, it allowed me to layer over my true identity with every possible disguise. I'd be anything for anybody in order to think I was loved or liked. Hide the gay was my way of surviving. Through some very courageous work connected to the late Debbie Ford, I discovered a whole host of masks my false self was wearing to hide the shame of being gay. In her groundbreaking book entitled Why Good People Do Bad Things, Debbie Ford, in Chapter 8, titled The Mask, explains why we expose the masks we use to hide behind. It began my road to authenticity, allowing me to be who I really am. And of course, this work was about the must. We must expose the masks that we use to hide behind. What floored me as I embarked on this journey of discovering and eventually removing the masks I so comfortably donned was that there could be different masks we could wear depending on the audience we wanted to impress, hide from, or be loved by. In total, Debbie reveals the intricacies and subtleties of each of the false masks, the faces of the false self, and the wounded ego. She presents 18 different masks and the shame and fear that gave birth to them. I felt brave knowing I was willing to uncover the one mask that bound me to my false self. It pissed me off to discover there were many disguises I could wear. Some I did with great talent. The chasm that separated my authentic self from my desire to be loved and liked was, at first, impossible for me to be aware of. The study of what these masks were and the pain that inspired me to put them on was a powerful antidote that enabled me to wake up in my life. Of the 18 masks I chose to study, it became evident very quickly that I used more than one to hide behind. In a sense, this nearly broke my heart. Yet Debbie assured me, by discovering the spiritual solution that would ultimately lead to the healing and the integration of my false self and wounded ego, I'd be able to set myself free. I discovered in my desire to live authentically that there were many masks I'd wear to hide my true self. I'd become the charmer, using charisma to melt away the toughest defense with a smile. I'd become the people pleaser, who was always seeking the validation of others for whatever he was doing. So as not to be busted as a nerd, I'd pretend to be too cool and go to great lengths to convince folks that everything is cool, that it's all under control, and that I had no worries. Having watched my mom wear the mask of the martyr, I was always hard at work trying to save the world. I would sacrifice my wellness for the sake of everyone else's. Close behind was the nice guy who had no backbone to ask for what he really wanted. So I'd put on a facade that I was helping other people, all while stuffing my feelings. The effervescence of the eternal optimist allowed me to appear like I was on a perpetual manic high, always eager to connect. The savior was my classic codependent caregiver, a rescuer who needed to be needed at all costs. To round off all the pretense and keep folks at bay, I choose to be the loner, withdrawing into the cold isolation of my own inner world. Finally, the victim. I choose the painful path of the powerless prey. Woe is me, they did it to me again. For me, both the challenge and the opportunity connected to identifying these masks that I wear was this: to wake up from the trance of the false self that prevented me from experiencing the limitlessness of my true and authentic expression. In all of this unmasking, the unlearning for me was to break through the web of lies that birthed my false self and separated my true self from the mask I constructed to fit in, belong, to be loved, or to be liked. This was not an easy chapter to write, because I needed to revisit intellectually the masks. I know them intuitively, but I needed to revisit them intellectually. So it kicked up a little bit of dust for me. And the dust mostly was shame that I would construct, that I would build these masks to hide behind so that you wouldn't see the real me. Perhaps you wear a mask, and typically it means that you are wanting to hide from the world a part of you that you think by being something else they're not going to see. So for instance, the gay part of me was hidden by pretending to be straight. And then to hide it even better was to get married to a woman for 4 years. And then I would hide behind the church so people didn't see that I was gay. So all of those masks that we wear are there for good reasons. They're strategies, really, of self-care that are birthed when we're much, much younger. And of course, what we don't realize as we get older is that we're wearing the mask. And then the other bit of frustration that comes is not realizing that we can take the mask off. We can actually not even put the mask on. That takes breathing in and a desire to live authentically. It takes a tremendous amount of courage. It is only the courageous who are vulnerable. So as I began to discover what it was I was covering up, when I began to bring more love to those parts of me that I no longer wanted to hide, I began to set myself free from having to don the masks. And it doesn't mean that there are not times in my life where I don a mask. That is absolutely true. There are times where I absolutely put on a mask. But there might be a good reason for me to put on a mask. But this notion of wanting to ensure, particularly if I'm in a role of wanting to protect myself, the notion of being holier than thou is a mask that I can wear. And it comes up when I find myself threatened, particularly by an outside force, with a dynamic of homophobia, for instance. So I'll put that on as a way to preserve myself, to protect myself. But I'm having the mask, it's not having me. I'm choosing to put it on as a way to keep myself safe. And then there are times where I unconsciously am about to put on a mask and I can catch myself. Because I live so unconsciously and I was wearing so many masks, but I didn't know that's what I was doing. Now that I've studied them, I understand them, I intuitively know my body compass, right? Those sensations in my body that tells me I'm about to kind of descend back into the shadows, or I'm about to pretend that I'm not something. I can catch myself and instead take a breath and choose to breathe some life into an authentic part of me that I'm now ready to present to the world. So until I take my last breath, those masks will always be available to me. Here's what I'm most proud of. It's being aware of when it is that those masks want to have me, and instead now I get to have the masks. So I live in choice. I can put them on, absolutely. I'll always have that choice. But here's the joy. And I think here's the really explicit rub for me. It's this notion of, wow, I've got myself to a place where I don't need to pretend. And with that comes this notion of not caring what you think, not caring what the world thinks, because I spent so long thinking you wouldn't love me or like me. Hence the desire to put on a mask. Because if I did something else that might inspire you to love or like me, why would I present to you the authentic aspect of myself? So today, I'm going to suggest 99.9% of the time, I'm living this true self. There isn't a mask on. And that, right, that's 100% responsibility for my life. That is freedom. And to live from that place is absolutely phenomenal.